There is a whole world that we can't see that acts on people, a supernatural world that's acting on us all the time for good and bad. Every society has thought this before ours. In fact, every society in all recorded history has thought that until, I'll be specific, August 1945, when we dropped the atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And all of a sudden, the West is just officially secular. We're God. There is no God but us. And that's the world that we have grown up in. But that's an anomaly. Like, no one else has ever thought that. There's never been a society that thought that. Every other society has assumed, and they've had all kinds of different explanations, and the details differ, but the core idea does not differ, never has differed from caves until now, that we're being acted on by spiritual forces at all times.
I'm starting to see a trend that every time you start talking about God, you start talking about spiritualism, and recognizing that America and the West is an anomaly, that there are spiritual forces that are working on people at all times. The media panics because the media, in my view, is a bit satanic. I genuinely believe this. I had a random user reach out and say, yeah, the reason they're freaking out is because NASA is satanic. The origins of NASA are satanic. And I went, what? What are you talking about? And what I'm about to tell you, you're not even going to believe me, but you can just research this. You don't even have to go down a dark hole on Reddit. You can just literally open Wikipedia. It is so in our faces, and yet we don't learn about this.
For over 50 years, all the information we receive on space, the Earth's land and climate, has come from a single source: NASA. NASA is a U.S. government agency. However, they work with other nations at the International Space Station. Alongside NASA of America, there are the Europeans, the Japanese, the Canadians, and even America's supposed enemy, Russia, among others. But what is the origin story of NASA? Let's take a look.
So you may have heard of a man named Aleister Crowley. If you haven't, I'll provide you with some brief spark notes. Aleister Crowley was an Englishman. He was also a drug abuser. He was a bisexual who is credited with heavily influencing the eventual counterculture revolution of the 60s in America. Free love, free love. Yeah, that book, Chaos. Things got weird and satanic in the 60s in America. And America is where this Englishman, Aleister Crowley, eventually moved. But what he is most famous for is black magic. He was an occultist who pledged his allegiance to demons. He believed that he could summon demons. When Aleister got older, he started a religious cult, a satanic cult known as the Lima. Crowley believed that the number of the beast, 666, was significant. He believed that humanity was entering in a new eon and that his religious motto, which was do what thou wilt, would rule it, right? He believed that actually he could create this beast and rule over nations by practicing rituals. He routinely practiced sex rituals, believed in free love, and he was very much connected to the elite in America. He was just openly publishing articles for Vanity Fair because he was best friends with their editor, and many of the elite in our society were his followers and believers. A Satanist. This is a fact. You can look this up. One such follower was a man named Jack Parsons, another wealthy young man. And here's what you should know about this time period. Before Jack Parsons enters the scene in America, the scientific consensus was that we would never enter space, that was an impossibility. But this rich kid, who also happened to be an occultist and who also would perform sex rituals and blood sacrifice to summon demons, he expressed the belief that they could fundamentally alter humanity, and he had a vision. He said, no, we can make this work. We can get to space. Jack Parsons is barely acknowledged on NASA's website, and he's the man who made rockets a reality and co-founded the agency's Jet Propulsion Lab, JPL, home to missions which paved the way for the Apollo programs and continue to explore Mars and outer space today.
JPL is NASA's only federally funded research and development center. Founded in 1936, the laboratory is now owned and sponsored by NASA and administered and managed by the California Institute of Technology.
He invented jet propulsion technology in the face of industry-wide derision that rockets would never exist, but was also a senior figure in the occult and invited L. Ron Hubbard, yes, L. Ron Hubbard of Scientology, into his confidence. Parsons tried to sell his government-funded inventions to Israel before winding up dying at the age of 37 in a self-created explosion, leaving a mass of disturbing materials for his friends to discover. Parsons claimed he first summoned the devil at age 13 in a terrifying experience. In 1936, they met a 22-year-old Frank Molina, who was a grad student who shared their passion for defying gravity. When Parsons and Molina met, their enthusiasm for rocketry and space travel bonded them like a Masonic handshake, one writer says. I'm sure it did. Molina helped by getting their research funded by Caltech, and their experiments were quite dangerous. There were a lot of explosions, and so he and his friends became known as the Suicide Squad. Once again, Jack's fascinations with the occult and rocketry collided. In the desert lands outside of Caltech, there is a former river channel called Arroyo Seco. It is flanked on both sides by rock, one of which is called Devil's Gate, thanks to its shape of a horned head. Some locals believed the mouth of Arroyo Seco was a portal to other dimensions. But for Parsons, the area had two uses. He tested rockets there, but years later, he would return to conduct ceremonies and rituals with other occultists in the same spot. What then happens is that on Halloween of all nights in 1936, they have a scientific breakthrough after they accidentally set fire to the oxygen line of their small rocket motor. And although it didn't launch, Molina and his team were enthused. They said this test was successful. He wrote to his parents, and NASA would later consider that experiment, which happened again on Halloween, to be the first rocket experiment of what would later become the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And the scientific community was skeptical, but the U.S. Army saw potential, and they offered to fund the project in 1939. So great. A satanic little cult meets the United States government. He was taken to a meeting of OTO, which stands for the Order of Templi Orientis, an occult society in Los Angeles in 1939, and he became fully engrossed. If you're wondering what OTO is, it was a group that was formed by and followed the teachings of Aleister Crowley. Again, the heroin-addicted sexual deviant and occultist who was considered the wickedest man in the world by the press in his native England. Within a few years, Crowley considered Parsons his American protege. He chanted Crowley's hymn before he lit his rockets. They're just chanting satanic, demonic hymns before they lit these rockets, guys. This is not a joke. This is history that is hiding right under your nose. By 1941, he and his wife, Helen, who he had married 5 years earlier, were indicted into what was known as the Agape Lodge, which was a branch of the church which practiced Crowley's religion of Thelemic magic. Then they came into money. They founded the Aerojet Engineering Corporation, which became the world's largest manufacturer of rockets and propellants. And within 20 years, it had become a $700 million a year business. Parsons was the vice president. A year later, he co-founded the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Parsons then came under the investigation of the FBI. They believed that he had been planning to give his rocket plans to the newly founded Israeli government in exchange for admission to the country and the chance of a new life abroad. Then he died rather mysteriously, Jack Parsons, in an explosion. Some claim he was suicided, some claim that it was an accident, some claim that he never died and actually he just disappeared. Honestly, we'll never know. We don't need to peddle in conspiracy theory because in this story, truth is stranger than fiction. That's the origins of NASA and the program, the Jet Propulsion Program, we're going to make it to space mission. But don't worry, it would be totally crazy for you guys to think that Satan worshipers are still involved in NASA. So yeah, think back to what Tucker is saying, that suddenly after this period, exactly when this was going on, when people were following this religion and believing in Satan, and then suddenly Americans just kind of got on board the atheist train. And we just said, yeah, no, we don't believe in any of that stuff in spiritualism anymore. Instead, what we believe in is science, rationality.
Seeking knowledge is a means of attaining closeness to Allah in Islam. So we as Muslims should be very wary of where we get our information from, especially when those giving us information about the world and the universe are followers of Shaitan, whose goal it is to deceive and lead us astray from the worship of God.